The United Kingdom has an epic history and a wealth of secrets still to uncover. Every year, hundreds of archaeologists dig, dive, and sieve to find clues, to add to the great historical jigsaw of our ancestors' lives.
You know when people say, what's the best thing you've ever found, guys? This.
I'm Professor Alice Roberts. This year we've uncovered some astonishing finds and made some truly groundbreaking discoveries.
Wow, look at that.
Each team of archaeologists has been armed with a dig diary camera so they can record their discoveries as they happen.
That is brilliant. Dave, I love you.
Our roving archaeologist, Dr. Nisha McSweeney, is out on the digs.
Who are we looking at?
It's royal.
And I'll be inviting the teams to bring in their finds for closer analysis.
That is absolutely beautiful.
This time, we explore Britain's west.
I've come to the edge of Dartmoor, where traces of the ancient past are all around, from castles to rows and circles of Bronze Age standing stones. But in fact, all of the west is rich in archaeology.
Join us to delve into an Ice Age cave.
We have found this beautiful woolly rhinoceros tooth.
Follow up on reported sightings of unexpected human bones.
Across the top of the cliff, we've got human remains eroding out of it.
And bid an emotional farewell to a very long-running site.
It's unique to be able to tell this story of ourselves in one place.
Welcome to Digging for Britain. Our first dig takes us to the Cotswolds, an area with a rich seam of Anglo-Saxon archaeology, and the name itself is thought to relate to an Anglo-Saxon chieftain called Cod and his control of this territory of the high lands or wolds, so Cotswolds.
This dig takes us back to around the early 6th century. The exact location has been kept secret to protect it. A team of volunteers led by MOD archaeologist Richard Osgood is following up on the discovery of high-status Anglo-Saxon artefacts in a field.
There's a chap called Chris who's a local metal detector who's got a permission from the farmer to come and have a look at this field. No one knew anything about this field. There was nothing on the historic environment record. He was pretty shocked to find not only a lot of Roman material, but he found two really, really beautiful Saxon items. There was a sword pommel mount from the top of a Saxon blade, which was made of silver gilt, and then a silver buckle as well. So these things are what are called treasure.
Treasure is legally classified as any piece of metal over 300 years old containing over 10% gold or silver, and it has to be reported.
Tell about that. Your thoughts when you got that out of the ground?
I was totally stunned because I knew exactly what it was.
You've not had anything like that before?
No. It's a detector stream, really, isn't it?
Chris made his finds in 2016 and reported them to Gloucestershire Council. It soon became clear that he'd stumbled on a 6th century Anglo-Saxon burial ground. This prompted a swift call to Richard and his team to formally excavate the site.
So we've got what we believe to be a nice skeleton over here. We've got a nice skull coming through, the cranium coming up in that way, and then we've got the jaw here with the individual teeth just poking through at this point, jawbone just there. As we come down, we've got what is the right arm here, just at the top, just the humerus, and then we come into where the rib section will be once we clean those down.
The finds date to a time when history and material culture show strong links with the Netherlands and Scandinavia. Most Britons at this time are thought to have been pagan, and their burial practices involved interring the dead with plenty of grave goods. And this cemetery is starting to yield some very intriguing finds.
It's a nice, massive, big piece of a rim, like a bowl.
Oh, wow, yeah.
What is it, Janine? Pottery?
Glass.
Glass?
Nice piece of glass.
Just a few days into the dig and they unearth a very rare artefact.
Oh, wow, well done. Oh, that is wonderful.
Beautiful.
You know when people say, what's the best thing you've ever found, guys? This.
The raw material for this bowl may well have come from the Eastern Mediterranean, a major focus for glass production at this time. This exciting archaeological find is unusual, as glass is so fragile, it rarely survives. A bowl like this would have been precious, another indication of high status.
Brilliant.
What really amazes me is that this has been in the ground since the 6th century. It's really, really shallow up there. There's not much topsoil. It's been ploughed for hundreds and hundreds of years. And yes, OK, it's broken, but it's still survived.
Elsewhere on site, the archaeologists are making more extraordinary finds.
Imagine you're holding a sword there, you've got the handle there. That would sit on the handle like there, so that's your guard.
Right.
Wow, that is fantastic.
It looks like a bead.
The Anglo-Saxons are well known for their incredibly intricate jewellery and decorative metalwork.
We're thinking it could be anything from a helmet to a drinking vessel to part of a scabbard. It is indicative of a high-status burial.
It's made of silver, but it's got this gilding in, which is why it looks like gold, and it shines beautifully. After 1,500 years, it's still shiny when you put it in the sun, and that's a really magical item.
In early Anglo-Saxon cemeteries, the dead were typically buried fully dressed, with other objects included in the grave that still speak to us of their identity and status.
What have you got now?
We've got a knife. Yeah, I think what we've got, a knife which is just sat over the pelvis area here, but it's just sat on what is the left hip. So probably a dagger, looks too small to be a spear. Yeah, it's certainly all happening here. I think we've got a very, very high status burial with a lot going on.
This unassuming field has proven an extremely rewarding site. Richard has joined me to delve deeper into a couple of the burials which seem to challenge our expectations.
This is photogrammetry of this individual,
burial,
is it?
that's right.
Yeah.
The quality's that good, you can actually see some of the finds in the burial itself. You've got the, you see this circular item just here?
Yeah,
And
yeah.
that's this.
Ah, is that a spindle whorl?
Yep, that's right. It's really, really nice and tactile, big solid stone spindle whorl. And then just further up,
Yeah.
that's this thing.
Ah, what's that? It looks like a toggle.
Yeah, it's an antler, well, we call it an antler prong, but it's something we think probably used within textile working. It's got a suspension loop for wearing just around your neck as part of the weaving process.
And then what about those? They're beautiful. Are they beads?
These are polished pieces of amethyst. And you can see they've also been pierced all the way through the middle for incorporation in jewellery.
These are objects that you would associate with an Anglo-Saxon woman, but I'm a bit dubious, actually, whether this is a woman that we're looking at. So the first thing is that the bones are quite robust. There's chunky areas of muscle attachment, and then the pelvis, it's frustrating that it's so fragmentary, but we are getting the very top of that great aesthetic notch at the back of the pelvis. I'm saying kind of probable male with that. This is what's really interesting, is the jaw, because that's an incredibly prominent chin. And then on the other side, we've got the angle of the jaw, which is flared out. That tends to push me more in this direction of this being a male skeleton.
That's right. So, yeah, so the sort of drinking vessels, swords, shields, spears, things that give you this real kind of macho and machismo feel. Yes, you expect them to be potentially male burials. But this one, if it's a male burial with female grave goods, really does sort of tip that on its head.
And this is the other burial that we saw quite clearly in your film that I was really intrigued by, and particularly that. Can I pick it up?
Yeah, if you do it very carefully, yeah.
That's really light. It's so thin and fine, isn't it?
We're wondering whether that is a Saxon dish or bowl, or in fact maybe a Roman piece of glass as an heirloom.
Really? Wow. What's this here? This is an iron object, isn't it?
That's the knife that we were excavating. And it looked really good in the ground, all intact, but it was held together by the soil. So
Yeah.
that is the knife, and it had a leather belt which had little bronze studs and fittings that went with it around the waist of the individual.
So this is what's astonishing about these Saxon graves, is you're looking at somebody who's buried fully clothed, and then with lots of other items around them which speak about their identity and their status.
So yeah, all the attributes of a warrior burial: sword, shield, spear, and all this extra equipment.
And then what's amazing about that is that this is a warrior burial. The individual in it was about 10 years old. So there's the top of the shin bone. And in fact, the very top of it is still completely separate. And then eventually, when it reaches its full length, it will fuse and these two bits of bone come together. So yeah, a growing individual. We're seeing exactly the same when we look at the teeth. These are the milk teeth. So those are the two baby molars, and they're about to be knocked out very soon by the premolars, so those two cusped teeth. You have to do all this objective archaeological science, but you can't help thinking about the people that laid that little body to rest.
When you're excavating, you are the first people to see this, since those that are grieving are putting them into the ground, and it's impossible not to project your own feelings and emotions into this.
An amazing pair of burials that tell us interesting things about identity in this period, but will yield up more secrets as we apply more science. The Saxons were originally pagan, but then they converted to Christianity, and they built the first monasteries in Britain. In Shaftesbury, Alfred the Great founded an abbey with a nunnery alongside it, with his daughter Ethelgafu as the abbess. Archaeologist Nisha McSweeney went along to see the excavations at the site.
The market town of Shaftesbury dominates the landscape of Dorset. It was once the home of Shaftesbury Abbey, the first nunnery in Britain that became one of the most powerful and prominent in the land. But the Abbey, like so many during the 16th century English Reformation, was plundered and destroyed by command of Henry VIII. I've come along to help archaeologist Julian Richards look for any remnants of this important historic site.
We're trying to find out whether what's laid out here is the actual truth.
Most of what Julian knows about the Abbey is from the findings of the last big excavations completed back in the 1930s. Following these, a plan was drawn up, mapping what was thought to be the footprint of the original Abbey. Julian has pored over these plans, but for him, something just doesn't add up. This is a site that has been dug before, you said, in the 1930s.
Yeah.
What made you come back to it now? Yeah.
We want to see just what survived and whether we believed elements of this plan. Because just simply from an architectural and engineering point of view, you look at some elements of it and you think, I don't believe that. That's not in the right place.
The original Saxon Abbey was rebuilt through the 11th and 12th centuries, and subsequent modifications included a rich refurbishment in the 14th century. The cloister of the Abbey was supposedly on the southern front, commanding the view from the top of the hill. But Julian suspects it was never there.
Now, this is where the cloister wall's supposed to be, but when we excavated it, we found absolutely nothing.
The cloister is the beating heart of an abbey, not just a place of contemplation and prayer, but the structure around which an abbey's principal buildings were arranged. Back in 1954, historian Laura Sydenham created architectural drawings for her extensive study of the abbey. But these drawings were based on the 1930s excavation, speculating where the cloister may have been. Locating the whereabouts of the cloister is critical to establishing where the rest of the abbey lay.
So the last thing we're doing is a couple of slots across the line of the cloister wall to try and see if that cloister exists on the southern side. So, well, come on, I'll show you what we're doing.
Fab, thank you.
Experience the past like never before with History Hit's award-winning original documentaries and ad-free podcasts with our expert historians like Dan Snow, Susanna Lipscomb, Lucy Worsley, Mary Beard, Tristan Hughes and myself, Matt Lewis. Sign up for an exclusive discount using the link in the description and embark on your historical journey from the wonders of ancient Egypt and the life of Anne Boleyn to the rise of Napoleon Bonaparte and the discovery of Shackleton's endurance. Get history wherever, whenever, exclusively on History Hit.
Unearthing the foundations of the lost abbey has proved a challenge in itself. There's a modern rockery garden which needs dismantling for the team to dig beneath.
So this is our next little problem, is removing a half-ton block of stone. Well, it's the end of the first week of digging and it's been very hot and we've moved enormous quantities of soil, but we're starting to get to grips, I think, with the layout of the abbey and what survives underneath these remains that were laid out in the 1930s. I think this is potentially where the wall is.
It's not looking promising. As we dig, Julian's becoming increasingly puzzled.
Have you found a wall?
What does it look like?
It doesn't look like a wall to me. Bizarrely, it basically looks like a shallow ditch. So we've got no
Shallow
wall
ditch,
here,
no
no wall there. 3 metres beyond that, we have got a wall, but this isn't the continuous structure that we were expecting to find here marking the edge of the cloister. Okay. It's just a ditch. I'm trying to dig another trench over there.
Julian's suspicions about the plans are becoming more compelling. The trenches they've dug are not giving him the answers he's looking for, so he decides to expand his initial dig outline. In pursuit of the cloister, the team have come across some telling features along the way.
So these cracked and worn tiles are part of the 14th century floor of this part of the church, worn by the feet of hundreds, thousands of people who've walked over them. And also you can see here, they dip down. This is because they're sinking into a grave that runs in this direction, because this part of the church will be where important people were buried.
The Abbey, profiting from royal patronage as well as being the site of St Edward's Shrine, became very prosperous. Over the centuries, it acquired huge estates in the surrounding area. It was said that if the Abbess of Shaftesbury married the Abbot of Glastonbury, they would be richer than the king himself. This made it a prime target during the dissolution of the monasteries. And in 1539, on the order of Henry VIII, the last abbess signed the deed of surrender. The lands were sold off, and this great symbol of Roman Catholic power was demolished. Julian's keen to show me the spot where just the week before there was a surprise find that paints a vivid picture of the Abbey's tragic demise. The end of the Abbey. What evidence have you got for what happened here on the ground?
Well, I mean, this is the bit really that I suppose gives you a very graphic idea of what happened, because this is where one of the massive pillars stood that supported the central crossing tower, but they've taken out every last bit of usable stone. But what amazes me is that what came out of that in this corner, they didn't want that.
This fella, who are we looking at?
We don't know who it is. We can't work out which
Male,
king or
female,
queen.
king
Well, we
or
don't even work out because the hairstyles are very similar.
Yeah.
It was an amazingly exciting find, you know, not just from the point of view of it being a beautiful object, but it does tell us something about how this part of the church, which was the junction between the nuns' private part of the church and the more public part, looked like.
This excavation at first opened up, this year, and they thought they knew what they were doing. They were just confirming a few things, and actually
what's been really interesting to see it kind of actually our expectations being confounded and the whole kind of thing being blown wide open. We thought we knew where this giant church was. We thought we knew where the cloister was. Because of the kind of huge scale of the demolition that went on with the dissolution of the monasteries. I mean, this entire complex was just completely flattened, almost nothing left of it. That's quite a sobering thought too, in terms of what that would have meant for the wider community, and the kind of they were economically dependent, they were socially dependent on this place, and it just kind of makes you think about the wider social effects of this change.
Despite digging all summer and discovering large sections of the Abbey, the puzzle over the cloister is yet to be solved.
Julian, tell me about this site that you've been digging. What was the big mystery?
Our efforts at the moment have been concentrated on excavating in the Abbey Church.
So the Abbey Church, I think this
Yes,
is drone footage that you've taken this summer.
Yes, so this is the area. In fact, you can see our excavation trenches here. But we've always had slight doubts about elements of it because it just doesn't seem quite right. And I've always felt that there's an element of imagination in this.
Right.
Like there really isn't room enough for a southern cloister before you go off the edge of the slope.
So do you think those cloisters are entirely imagined then?
I'm beginning to think that there isn't a cloister on the south of it at all.
Yeah.
I think it's probably on the north.
And what about the finds? You've brought some wonderful things in.
Yes, I mean, we found some amazingly fresh-looking tiles. Beautiful little things, but still with all their glaze on them, which implies that whatever was there wasn't being walked on much. So, you know, the tiles tell a story, but then this one, it's absolutely fantastic, isn't it? This was just in the demolition period rubble. So 1539, they start smashing the place up. And clearly, this, if you look at it, it's three-dimensional. It's got a back to it. It's not a tomb figure. It's a standing statue.
Yeah.
And it's royal as well, because you've got a crown, and also, look, these are representing jewels on the crown. We think it's male. It looks a bit like some statues of Edward II, but we need to research this a bit more.
Yeah.
So that was a fantastic find.
And what about this lovely bead?
Well, one of our volunteers was digging and said, I found a plastic bead. And I said, no, you haven't, because you're digging a medieval deposit.
So is this jet?
It's jet, but it's such a big bead. If it was part of a rosary, to me, the story that, you know, that object might be able to tell, you know, was this a nun being ejected from there, you know, her rosary broke?
Yeah.
Because this obviously just sort of fell into a corner and then has ended up in the rubble. But, you know, to me, it's the story that an object like that could tell, you know, if only it could talk.
As we go right back into prehistory, archaeological evidence can become very thin on the ground. And that's because our prehistoric ancestors were nomadic hunter-gatherers. They just didn't settle in one place for very long at all. Our next dig comes from a site in North Wales which contains precious, tantalising glimpses of very early modern humans in Britain.
Hidden away in a ravine east of the Vale of Clwyd lies the entrance to Ffynnon Bino Cave. The first excavations here were carried out by the Geologists Association back in the 1880s. They found stone tools and plenty of ancient animal bones. Over the decades, this site has attracted a lot of archaeological attention. This year, Dr. Rob Dinnis and a team from the University of Edinburgh are investigating the cave, and they're filming a dig diary along the way.
This is the first week we've opened up the trenches now, so we're starting to work in earnest. And the cave's up there, so let's take a wander up and see.
There are two trenches, one inside the cave and one just outside.
What we're digging here is a spoil heap. So that is material that's come from inside the cave that's been redeposited out the front as part of earlier excavations in the 1880s.
Some of the earlier finds in the cave take us right back to a time when Neanderthals were living in Britain. The Victorian dig found these beautiful flint spear points, characteristic of late Northern European Neanderthals. Another find was a type of stone tool thought to have been made by early modern humans around 35,000 years ago. It's thought there was a hiatus between Neanderthals and modern humans in Britain that spanned several millennia. As well as evidence of early humans, that first dig also turned up animal bones of 16 different species, including cave lion and mammoth.
The reason why we're digging this is to look for material that was missed in those earlier excavations. And that appears to be the case. We've already found some bits of Ice Age animal bones, some animal teeth, as well as some small bits of stone tools.
The team is looking in the spoil heap outside the cave for good reason. Early excavations often missed key finds. Back in 2014, a human tooth was found in the spoil. It was radiocarbon dated to around 2300 BC during the late Neolithic. Inside the cave, Rob is digging down through the muddy sediment on the floor, hoping to find untouched layers.
Most of the Ice Age sediments were actually removed during the dig in the 1880s, but we have been doing some work and we found quite a lot of intact sediments that contain Ice Age animal bones. We found a bank of intact sediments that contain rhino, contain hyena, contain intact Ice Age material, and fingers crossed we'll be able to find some archaeological material in there.
As well as Neanderthals and early modern humans, the archaeologists are searching for evidence as to who else may have used the cave. They've previously found a coprolite, or fossilised faeces, belonging to a hyena thought to be at least 35,000 years old. The 19th century researchers also found coprolites and noted a number of gnawed bones. They concluded that hyenas must have been living in the cave as a den and were probably responsible for bringing the bulk of the animal bones into it. The team continued to dig down into the untouched sediments.
Here we are in the pit, having a wonderful time. We are down to intact cave earth here, intact deposit. We have found this beautiful woolly rhinoceros tooth. Woolly rhinoceros went extinct in Britain 35,000 years ago. So this means that we are in deposit that is at least that old, which is significant because around that time is when we think there were last Neanderthals and the earliest modern humans in Britain. So we're in the right time period, on track, potentially for finding archaeology.
The assemblage from this cave is incredibly rare. In fact, Funanbino Cave is only one of 3 places in Britain to have evidence of both late Neanderthal and early modern humans in the same site. It appears that this cave still contains a rich seam of archaeology. Its secrets will keep archaeologists like Rob and his team coming back here for many years into the future.
Most archaeological excavations tend to take place over a single block of time, particularly if they're related to construction and development. University excavations, on the other hand, usually take place over just a few weeks in the summer, but the archaeologists will keep coming back if there's plenty to find. One such dig near Bristol has turned into a real labour of love. It's been going on for well over a decade and is now just coming to a close. Just north of Bristol, close to the mouth of the Severn Estuary, sits beautiful Berkeley Castle. It's the oldest building in England, still inhabited by the same family, whose ancestors began building it in the 11th century. In 2010, Digging for Britain was on site with Bristol University archaeologists who wanted to understand what was happening here before the castle was built. This year, we return to Berkeley with Professor Mark Horton and Dr. Stuart Pryor, who are searching for more evidence of the origins of this site.
It's unique to be able to tell this story of ourselves in one place, and here in Berkeley encapsulates that idea.
When they first started their dig, they suspected the site had been home to an 8th century Saxon minster. But the scale of the monastic settlement proved much greater than they imagined. The amount of archaeology exceeded expectations and has brought them back year after year to explore the minster buildings and boundaries.
So this is the famous Berkeley excavation, and it is a veritable slice through history. But the real interest of Berkeley is the period before the conquest. This is the time in which Berkeley was a minster or a monastery. We found huge quantities of material associated with this Anglo-Saxon monastery.
A minster is an important church often accompanied by a collection of monastic buildings. A place of prayer, but also a place to live and work for monks and nuns. Over the years, 8 trenches have been dug around the estate to assess the scale of the monastery. The team are currently digging in a paddock to the north of the castle. According to records, the Saxon minster here was demolished in 1043. After the Norman conquest, the stone was used to build later structures in Berkeley, including part of the existing church and castle. As well as the monastery, the team have unearthed multiple layers of history.
We've got at least 1,000 years of history in one trench. Starting at the top, we had 17th and 18th century garden features. Below that, we had burials from the 17th century. Below that, we had an English Civil War ditch. Underneath that, we found Anglo-Saxon structures, and that's the most important find for us.
One exceptionally rare piece found at Berkeley is this exquisite gold ring, a fine example of just how skilled the Anglo-Saxons were with intricate metalwork. But the team has found evidence of human activity even earlier than the Saxons. They haven't found buildings, but there are definite traces of Roman activity.
We found a Roman roadway cutting across here, and this very curious ditch-like feature. And in the fill of that, we found a piece of broken up silver, a great big piece of what we call hack silver. Now that's what the Romans paid their barbarian mercenaries to defend their villa estates, literally chopping up the family silver. And maybe what we've actually got is a little bit of family silver that one of those mercenaries dropped and just left it there in the ditch.
The Berkeley project has been an emotional rollercoaster of a journey, both on and off-site. For Stuart, there was a time when he thought he wouldn't even live to see the dig through.
I had a serious brain injury 3 years ago.
Following an illness, Stuart's prognosis was dire.
They thought I was going to die. If I did survive, they thought I'd be hospitalised for the rest of my life.
But Stuart fought hard, despite the seemingly impossible physical challenges, and against all the odds, he was determined to get back out into the field to return to the job he loved and the dig at Berkeley.
Fortunately for me, I'm a bit of a fighter and I wasn't going to give up. Basically fought my way back from being on the deathbed to being back at work again.
At the end of the dig, with heavy hearts, they've made the difficult decision to call it a day.
Right, it's ending. I'm retiring from Bristol University and you've got to draw a line somewhere, and kind of that's the end of an era.
In its closing year, the dig here has not disappointed. A find late in the day provides yet more evidence of the lost Berkeley Minster.
So perhaps our most important find this season is this ditch. It's not a defensive arrangement, it's a boundary ditch. It was a way of delimiting the edge of the Anglo-Saxon monastery. And we know it's Anglo-Saxon because actually just last night this came out, and it's part of an Anglo-Saxon buckle. And what's remarkable, it's still got traces of the gilding. We haven't cleaned it up yet. We're pretty happy that this is evidence of, what one of those high-status nuns would have been wearing in the 8th and early 9th centuries.
Since 2005, this project has delivered year after year. But now, it's time to say goodbye.
I will be sad to leave Berkeley. A part of me will always remain at Berkeley because I've loved my time working here.
So tell me what you've found then. Summarise this kind of 15 years of digging.
So essentially, we were looking to prove that there was actually a minster at Berkeley because nobody even knew when we started that there was actually the minster at Berkeley.
What do the finds tell you, and why do they make you think that this was actually a minster?
So we've got evidence for probably maybe a scriptorium. So if you were a king and you wanted to get any writing done, you would go to a monastery or a nunnery and get your Anglo-Saxon documents drawn up. And so we've got evidence for that in the finds. So we've got this lovely little thing here, which is the astle.
So an astle is a pointer for, well, keeping your place in a book, isn't it?
That's right. You can see there's a little Celtic cross in there.
So here it would have attached onto a bone pin.
Yeah. And then when you get to the end of your page, you use the little round bit to turn over your medieval vellum parchment or the page.
So that's a beautiful object in its own right, but it's telling us something really important about Berkeley. It's telling us that there were people reading and writing.
Reading and writing.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's a long-standing, powerful religious community.
What kept you going back?
We just didn't get to the end of all the... I mean, you keep going down and keep going down normally until you run out of archaeology. And we haven't. We've got pottery, we've got metal artefacts, we've got all sorts of things that are Roman in origin. We've got a tiny little scalpel.
Oh, yeah, can I have a look?
Yeah.
So would that have been used surgically, do you think?
I think surgically, or at least in some sort of bathroom kit. So if you're chopping up your makeup and that sort of thing, or herbs and spices.
Lovely.
Yeah.
And what about that pin? Is that
I think that's almost certainly a clothes pin. But you can see under the camera there.
Oh, the head of that is really ornate.
But yeah, it's for holding your clothing together before buttons were invented. And then you've got strap ends. Yeah.
Come look at that one.
That's one of my favourite finds. It's like a little dragon's head. You can just see where the strap would have fitted.
Oh, that's amazing. Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
The Anglo-Saxons did love hiding little animals and faces and things.
That's it, yeah. And then next is one of my favourite finds, which my students gave the name of the Berkeley gnome. And if you put it under the camera, you can see it's a little face.
It does look like a gnome.
Yeah. So imagine a crossguard on a dagger.
Yeah.
Yeah. On either end of it, you've got one of those little terminals.
Right.
Yeah.
And we've got an arrowhead.
Yeah, that's almost certainly 15th century, I think. Imagine being shot from the castle walls from one of those.
So you've got find specialists.
Yes, they're
looking at all of these now, poring over them, trying to work out what they all are.
So we've got 15 years of research findings trying to work out exactly what they all are.
Yeah.
For our final report. And then it brings us right up to our 1980s builder's Casio watch, or gardener's Casio watch.
A very precious archaeological item, that, Stuart.
Well, we do total collection, so our students pick up everything they find, So if it's in the trench and it's buried, it's a find.
Yeah, it was in the ground.
It was in the ground, and somebody lost their digital watch, and one of my students found it.
Very beautiful thing, Stuart.
Well, in 200 years' time, I'd have never seen one before.
Yeah.
And they're mystified as to what it was, yeah?
They'll be able to get it out of the collection at Berkeley Council.
That's it, yeah, absolutely.
It can be very difficult to come up with names for groups of people in prehistory. We have absolutely no idea what they called themselves. So often we look at their culture, at the objects they made, and use that as a label for them. On our next dig, we're joining MOD archaeologist Richard Osgood and his team of ex-military personnel in Wiltshire, and they're excavating a Bronze Age burial mound of a type that is linked to the mysterious Beaker people. This burial mound lies just 5 miles from Stonehenge on Salisbury Plain and is known as Barrow Clump.
We're now at the site of the last of the protected burial mounds at this part of Salisbury Plain. What I'm hoping to find in this trench is anything that it is put into it that will relate to the early Bronze Age. This site never fails to deliver. Each year, there's been one really incredible story that's emerged. I'm really optimistic that we might, in this instance, be privileged enough to see a Beaker grave.
This type of burial mound is typical of the early Bronze Age, around 2000 BC. This is the time when the last stones of nearby Stonehenge were set in place. Although there's still so much about Stonehenge that mystifies us to this day, we know it was built in stages, from the Neolithic through to the early Bronze Age, the time of the Beaker people.
The Beaker people, it's a name that's been given because the burials are of a particular type. They are usually accompanied with a pot, the eponymous beaker. It's a little drinking vessel that's found in the grave with them, sometimes with other grave goods as well.
Most of our knowledge of these Bronze Age people comes from their graves, which often contain these distinctive beakers. Particular styles of vessels help with dating and show how traditions spread. The earliest known bell-shaped beaker pottery comes from Portugal and Spain, but then the style spreads north. Within 100 years, these beakers appear in Britain. 2 beaker burials have previously been found at Barrow Clump, but Richard thinks there may be more. And it's not long before the team starts to uncover human remains.
Well, the jumble of bones is a jumble of bones, but it appears quite likely that this jumble of bones is a secondary feature.
Beaker burials are typically found under the centre of a mound, often surrounded by a large ring ditch. This would have been dug out by hand using tools such as antler picks and cow shoulder blade shovels, tools often found left behind in the ditches. Some mounds would be reused for secondary burials. These bones are most likely to be from a later time, not a beaker burial, as they're so shallow.
That's the trouble with it, because ordinarily, if you're just dealing with a single skeleton, or even a couple of skeletons, you know what's attached to what, so you know what you're going to expect when you're cleaning them up. With this being a total jumble, you've just got to be very careful because you don't know exactly what you're going to find.
As they dig deeper into the mound, the team find a barbed and tanged flint, typical of the Bronze Age.
It's a rough out for an arrowhead, so it's not complete. Somebody's started work on it and they decided not to go any further with it. It's a really nice find, and it's definitely Bronze Age.
Barrow Clump is officially protected as a scheduled monument. Despite this, it's also today part of an agricultural landscape and an area of intensive military training.
There's loads of things that could threaten archaeology on a military training area. A tank is 60 tonnes, it's a really, really heavy thing. That driving over a burial mound could potentially do a lot of damage. So what we're looking at here is just evaluating precisely how damaging those entities are.
Measures have been put in place to remind the army of the important heritage here, but there are some local residents who are harder to control.
We put signs up just to make it extra clear. Big spade, sign saying no digging. What it doesn't do is tell badgers how to read. The really big problems are burrowing animals, and over the years we've been finding a lot of archaeology that's been brought out from the badger sets.
Meanwhile, the team has worked their way down to what they believe is the centre of the burial mound.
They've just come across a set of human remains. I can see from here the femur and the pelvis of an individual. The bones look in really good condition, so we're really excited because you've got what we've been looking for the whole 3 weeks in one small hole in this barrow.
Archaeologist Dorothy Griffiths was first to find the bones.
Truth be told, I was about to give up because we kept seeing so much flint and so many rocks. I haven't had a chance to make a snapshot to send and boast to my friends back in America and those in Jamaica. So I'll be excited. Having not done archaeology for over 17 years, I am, as I said, overjoyed.
As the rest of the remains are revealed, the team are confident that this is a Beaker burial, but they have yet to find an actual Beaker.
The real hope is that there's going to be a Beaker at one end. That would be the real triumph of this dig.
Now the dig is finished, the finds, including the bones, have been carefully packaged up and taken off-site. And our roving archaeologist, Nisha McSweeney, has been along to the labs at Wessex Archaeology to find out more.
At the Wessex Post Excavation, I'm hoping project manager Phil Andrews has been able to establish whether it was a Beaker burial they found.
Is this Beaker from the burial?
This unfortunately isn't. This was found probably about a couple of 100 metres away, but the burial we had didn't have a vessel. In fact, it didn't have any grave goods with it.
And do we need to have a Beaker for it to be a Beaker period burial?
We don't, but we know from other evidence, particularly the size of the graves, which are very substantial chambered graves with timber linings, of evidence for timber lining, that they are of that period. We're very certain that it is a Beaker burial, and we will confirm this through radiocarbon dating in due course.
I'm curious to know what Phil has found out about the impact of the military presence at Barrow Clump.
We're investigating the site. We've been looking at the impact of military vehicles passing over some of the remains, and this is a classic example of the weight of vehicles has just crushed what may have once been a complete vessel. Overall, the damage being caused by vehicles is very slight. Certainly the damage from badgers is clearly much more significant, but military vehicles, they're not causing a significant impact at all, which is good news.
It's great news for the archaeology then. Badgers are worse than tanks.
Tanks, yeah.
Senior osteoarchaeologist Kirsten Egging-Dinwiddie is examining the remains for the first time.
So we've got a little bit of the skull there.
What bit of the skull is that?
If I hold it like that.
Is it?
Not quite.
No.
It's actually this bit here.
Wow, okay.
Yeah. That's quite chunky. I mean, mine. If I feel mine's very small, whereas it's quite
serious cheekbones.
Yeah. So, which is,
are we thinking he?
I'm thinking he. The size of this individual and some of the traits and things on the skull. If we look at some of the other bones. The size of the head of the humerus there, that's quite large, so I'm pretty happy with this being a male.
What's exciting about post-excavation is what it can reveal. The age, the sex, so much more about who this person was.
So that's really nice, strong muscle attachments there. Not massively long, so not necessarily a very, hugely tall person, but certainly quite robust. And again, these slightly strange muscle attachments there. An anchoring point for your muscles and attachments.
Bigger muscles need bigger anchoring points.
Yeah.
What about the age then?
Okay, so we've got the ends of the bones are completely fused on. Not only is it fused, it's started to get these osteophytes, these bony growths at the edges, which is a sign of wear and tear.
It's not just an adult then, it's an adult who's then lived longer and seen
yes, certainly into the 40s, possibly up to mid-50s.
So does Kirsten think the environment at Barrow Clump is causing any damage to these bones?
You can see that's quite eroded. You've lost most of the surface there.
What would have done that?
Could be water flowing through the grave. There are many, many things that affect the burial environment. Even putting fertiliser on the soil, that can leach in and change the chemical makeup of the soil and the burial environment, which may adversely affect the bone.
Meeting Phil and Kirsten today has given me a real insight into the research that is being done into the preservation on this site. And it seems as though their findings are positive.
Military vehicles, tanks rolling over these graves. Actually, it's been really good to see that that's not so much of a problem. that actually it's funny, it's the badgers, it's the soil chemistry and those more natural things. So that's quite good to know.
Our next dig takes us to the coast of South Wales, where strange things are afoot, quite literally in this case.
Around 20 miles west of Cardiff, along the coast near the village of Monknash, there's a cliff proving to be a cause for concern. After public reaction to what appeared to be human bones sticking out of the cliff face, the police were called in to investigate. The bones were identified as archaeological remains, and Professor Jackie Mulville from Cardiff University was drafted in to help.
In this case, this is what we call rescue archaeology. We get reports from the public, and obviously people are slightly concerned at the idea that you can see bits of legs eroding out.
Previously rescued bones from this site have been dated to the 15th century, during the early Tudor period. On this occasion, there's been a report of a skeleton in urgent need of attention. It sits right next to the coastal footpath, a popular walk for the general public.
A bit of human bone here, this sort of flat section here, and there's a human bone here, which you can't, it's very hard to see.
As the excavation progresses, it's clear the lower part of the skeleton is missing.
Half the pelvis has gone, so we don't actually have it with us today, and the bit we've got left probably isn't as diagnostic as it should be.
With storm swells from the Atlantic often battering the coastline, the cliff face is eroding backwards. Coastal officer Paul Huckfield works closely with the police and Cardiff University. He's very familiar with this stretch of coast.
Across the top of the cliff, as you can see now, we've got 1, 2, 3, maybe 4 grave cuts with human remains eroding out of it. Over time, as the cliffs have eroded, more and more burials have just been exposed by natural erosion of the cliff face as it moves backwards.
The team know that the cliff is full of bones and eventually plan to excavate the other visible remains. But for the moment, their focus has to be on the ones they can reach. Jackie hopes these will divulge more of the wider story.
We'll be able to work out more accurately who they were, what age they were, what sex they were, and bits about their life histories. And by reuniting them and then reinterring them, we're actually treating them, I suppose, in a much better way than them sort of falling piecemeal out the cliff.
As the team dig on, there's an unanticipated twist.
So far we have the elbow joint right here, the humerus pointing that way, which is the opposite way to what we'd expect it, given that the legs are down there. And then you have the ulna, so that's the lower arm, coming this way. So we think maybe something, the hands behind the head. So we're all a bit perplexed.
Jackie's unsure why the body is contorted in the way it is.
The burial has thrown up a few surprises. What we appear to have here is somebody who's been buried in a slightly sort of haphazard manner, and this suggests that possibly they were buried in a hurry or by somebody who didn't actually care. It could be that they're actually compressed in a grave that's too small because the person didn't have time, or perhaps didn't want to make the investment to make a grave that was the right size for them. So it is unusual.
The coastal location and unorthodox positioning of the bodies has given rise to a number of theories as to who these people might be. One theory suggests they could have been victims of shipwrecks, and local legends tell of wreckers. These people would put lights around the necks of sheep, walking them along the cliff top to lure ships onto the rocks. For centuries, wrecking ships to loot cargo was a very profitable activity. Over the course of the day, the archaeologists begin to reveal the rest of the skeleton.
We're making really good progress. We can now see most of the head. We've got the mandible exposed. You can also see sort of the ribs, the pelvis and the lower back. So we can see we've got the full torso of an individual who's sort of slightly twisted.
Just before the bones are lifted for further examination, the team gather some final evidence.
By taking a number of images, we can stitch them together using a photographic program, and then that will allow us to actually have an accurate record of the articulation of the bones when we get back to the lab.
These burials seem to be part of an unknown graveyard, or at least there are no marked graves up on the top of the cliff.
No, so there's no marked graves, but people have been found for decades, really, sort of since the 1980s. And some of the graves are aligned. There's even some graves which have sort of disarticulated human remains and they're a little bit further back from the cliff. So we're kind of like, well, who are they? Why are they there?
And you've got a lovely 3D photogrammetry of the skeleton as you were excavating it.
Yeah. What you've got is somebody whose arms appear to be above their head, and then their head is turned sort of to one side. So the other burials that have been found further along the cliff, they're all interred with their hands sort of down their sides. So this is an anomaly.
Right, OK.
OK.
And then we're missing the entire bottom half of this individual. Presumably that has just eroded out of the cliff.
Well, we know it was there because a member of the public sent in a photo and you could see sort of, the bottom of the legs.
Yeah. Ethically, you kind of want to reassemble them, don't you?
you know.
So you think this is a young individual, isn't it?
Yeah.
The top of the humerus here, the epiphysis, is completely unfused. So that was still growing. And then if I look at the teeth, the first molar is through. That comes through on average age 6. Second molar comes through around 12. And I can see down in there the wisdom teeth still nestled in their crypts. So you are probably looking at somebody who is a young teenager.
Yeah, but around that time, young teenagers, you could be treated as an adult, really. You would be in employment around that time.
Yeah, it is tricky, isn't it? Because with young men or boys, they haven't developed the kind of robusticity of the skull that we see later on. But that is quite a squared off chin. But this is quite a
sort of
feminine
smooth.
face.
Nice smooth.
With the forehead coming down to the nose there.
We think it's a teenage boy who's been inserted rather strangely in a grave. He's at a different level to all of the others.
Yeah.
The others are all male.
Yeah.
So who are they? And why are they all male? So there's some fantastic stories about smugglers and pirates and things. And in fact, there's a fantastic story that the pub, which is actually now built as part of the sort of monastic grange, used to be a mortuary for shipwrecked sailors.
Really?
Yes. And we know there were shipwrecks around that point. Whether they were caused by the wreckers or whether they were just natural shipwrecks, we don't know. And, I mean, there's quite a lot of, I suppose, accounts of shipwrecked people not being buried in consecrated ground, but actually being buried quite close to the edge quite close to where they're found by the sea.
It's tricky because it's all kind of circumstantial evidence at the moment, isn't it?
It is.
We know there were shipwrecks there. We've got this intriguing story about the pub being a mortuary.
Yeah.
So what about further analyses on this skeleton? What are you going to try?
So we're going to try and find out sort of where they lived and sort of what they ate, really. Essentially, the more sort of analyses you do, the more sort of a complex picture you build up of somebody's life.
Yeah.
So you don't know. I mean, Britain's an island full of rich archaeology. We will continue to find more and more coastal archaeology because of climate change, storminess, and all of those things. So it's important that we have good mechanisms and we get the public on side, actually. Because, I always think that there's these sort of lost souls.
Yeah.
We should be sort of bringing them all back together.
And if anyone does know where his legs are,
yes, please.
bring them to Cardiff University.
Please bring them back.
Yeah.